Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, I have just seen the biopic slash anecdotal film, A Beautiful Day in My Neighborhood, that is with Matthew Reyes playing the main character, Lloyd Vogel, a reporter, an investigative reporter who is tasked with interviewing and writing a short article on Fred Rogers, the Mr. Rogers, played by Tom Hanks. And I have to say that this is... How do you really break down a movie like this? Because, look, Tom Hanks is playing one of the most beloved people in film history, in media history. And here he is, Tom Hanks, one of the most beloved people in that same history. So it seems like it should be such a perfect union, and yet you are always reminded of the fact that this is not Fred Rogers. And I don't know if that is intentional or not. When you listen to Hanks talk, Fred Rogers had this very distinctive method of talking. The decay of his voice, the part at the very end, the how do I put it? It's called, I believe it's called the decay in sound design, but it's just the very end of how Mr. Rogers speaks was very distinctive. Just the way he kind of finished his words, and Hanks does not create that. So there is just this sliver of difference that is so clear. And why is it so clear? Well, maybe this is a choice because he doesn't want to say Mr. Rogers is all that easy to replicate, only to imitate. And that's a thing about this particular film. Now, when you look into the life of Lloyd, you begin to see that he is a man with a lot of pain and a lot of suffering. And this is the focus of the film. Not so much Fred Rogers, who in his own life had a lot of pain and suffering. He was a fat little kid who got chased and bullied. And, you would know these things from the film because they are referenced, but they are not the subject of the film. The subject of the film is Lloyd and his family and how meeting Mr. Rogers forces him to change who he is. And I have to admit this, during this film I teared up. I really did. I started remembering my own mother's passing and I cried. And yes, it is a very powerful movie in that regard. The performances here, this is a film that makes one person's story so important and yet shows us how we interact with each other and how we reflect off each other is such a thing. And, one thing I have to point out is the pieces fall together a little too well. But, again, this is a movie. And, hey, maybe they did fall together a little too well. This man had a family that wanted to come together, but he was resisting it because he couldn't give up the pain that he was suffering. And then finally, there is this catharsis and resolution, and I asked myself, could I be that strong? Interesting thing about this movie, it makes me reflect on myself, and I will say flat out, I really wish I could talk to Fred Rogers. I'd love to spend an afternoon with the man and ask him about my problems and my pain and my suffering and all the terrible things that may befall my life in the future and all the terrible things that have befallen my life in the past. And, there is an effort in this film to say that Fred Rogers is an attainable state, that he's sort of a Christian version of Buddha, that he is human and that he is imperfect just like the rest of us, but it's what he does with the anger he feels and the pain in his heart that distinguish him. And again, I listen to the voice of Fred Rogers, and I am oddly reminded of the rendition of Nine Inch Nails' Hurt by Johnny Cash. That I hurt myself today to see if I still feel that, almost as if it pained him to speak and to continue. I almost heard that in the voice of Rogers, the real Fred Rogers, when he spoke, as if he was so greatly wounded that it was a huge effort for him, and that he was just so good at it that he made it look easy, but it wasn't. And that, maybe that's a good way to look at Fred Rogers, that beneath that calm exterior, there really are layers, because he is human, like the rest of us. And I mean, I'll give you a great example of a point in my life where I feel like I'm reaching that spirit. And, you know, I work with the homeless, of course, and the other day, my boss had come down, owner of my company, and he saw how that almost everyone who came into the shelter, almost every homeless person, would come and they'd stop, excuse me, I am still sick, and they'd speak to me, and they'd tell me about their day and how things were doing and how they were improving. And yeah, you know, when I looked to Mr. Rogers, I looked to him as an inspiration for how I might be able to influence the people that I live with, that I work with, that I am charged with the well-being of. And that's difficult for me, because you look at somebody and you know they're going to go out there and use. And one thing that was absent from this movie, A Beautiful Day in My Neighborhood, was the word love. Fred Rogers is known to have said, "I love you just the way you are." I never heard Hank say that, but, you know, that was in the documentary. And of course, you know, how do you express love for somebody who you know is going to go out there and jam a needle in their arm and shoot up drugs? You know, it's just such a painful world we live in that I look at Rogers and I wonder, how would he have dealt with this? Because he got to them when they were children. That's what he specialized in. And when you can shape a child's life, there is something so much easier in that, because they haven't been weathered by the world. Now, this is a movie proving that he could do more than shape children's lives. He could shape the lives of every person he came into contact with. And I think that you should make this movie a must-watch, because it is a movie that teaches you how to be truly human. And that's a lesson that I still need to learn. Anyway, I'm Richard. Hello, folks. I'm Fred the Facehugger, reminding you to like and comment on this video. Subscribe if you haven't already, because if you don't, Random Street Theater might not be around forever. And for every 1,000 subscribers, we're going to take a pound of trash out of the ocean. We don't have that many yet. So, get subscribing. Tell your friends, or I facehug you. Mwah!